Welcome to Twilight Terror Stories. Twilight is not just the end of day, it's the beginning of something else. A time when the shadows stretch and fear takes its first breath. You've stepped into that moment now, and the stories are waiting. Let them find you. Never did I imagine that a relic casket, caked in the dust of ages, would become the hinge upon which my world swung into peril and shadow. Yet, as I huddled in the enveloping darkness, the hushed, venomous whispers of smugglers coiling around me, the stark truth bloomed. Some treasures offer only poisoned blooms, best left undisturbed beneath the sands. My name is Dr. Eleanor Vance. By trade and passion, I am an archaeologist, a decipherer of Egypt's ancient whispers etched in stone and papyrus. Years I have dedicated to the meticulous resurrection of the past, tracing the faded lines of hieroglyphs, reconstructing forgotten narratives. But no measure of academic rigor could have forged armor against the tempestuous reality that erupted under the unforgiven glare of the sun, deep within the Valley of the Kings. It marked my third season wrestling secrets from the earth near Luxor. The heat pressed down like a physical weight, a relentless furnace baking the landscape as my team and I painstakingly sifted through a sector ripe with promise. Weeks had bled into one another, yielding the familiar detritus of history: pottery fragments, a glint of tarnished metal, the occasional bead, gratifying yet mundane. Until the day my trowel met not yielding sand, but unyielding resistance. "Everyone!" The call tore from my throat, sharp with an unexpected surge of adrenaline. I think I've struck something. My colleagues converged, their faces mirroring my anticipation as I knelt, brush working with fevered delicacy. Sand gave way, revealing contours. Slowly, form emerged from the ochre depths, a compact wooden chest, its surfaces alive with intricate carvings, symbols that resonated with an unfamiliar, unsettling power. "Dr. Vance," Ben Carter, my assistant, breathed, his voice tight with wonder. "I've never seen iconography like this." He spoke the truth. The chest felt alien to the stratum, an artifact displaced in time. It pulsed with an aura of profound antiquity, its preservation defying the centuries it must have weathered. With hands that betrayed a tremor, I lifted the coffer from its earthen cradle. It possessed a surprising heft, and a faint, internal shifting whispered against the wood. Back to the field lab, I managed, clutching it as one might a fragile life. Full documentation before we even think about opening it. Within the canvas walls of our makeshift laboratory, the chest became the sole focus of our world. We photographed, measured, logged every detail. The glyphs remained an enigma, a tantalizing fusion of recognizable motifs and utterly alien designs. It was a linguistic labyrinth, teasing comprehension while withholding the vital key. As twilight painted the desert in strokes of violet and bruised orange, the moment arrived. My pulse hammered against my ribs as I eased the lid upward. Inside, cushioned by a material resembling desiccated silk, lay a trove of small wonders. A scarab beetle wrought in heavy gold, its eyes chips of deepest garnet that seemed to absorb the fading light. A cluster of small, finely made tools of indeterminate purpose. and, most astonishingly, a collection of papyrus scrolls preserved with an impossible freshness. "Extraordinary," I whispered, carefully unfurling the edge of one scroll. The ink was stark, the script flowing as if penned only yesterday, not millennia ago. This could rewrite entire chapters of pharaonic history. We toiled through the night, the silence broken only by the click of the camera and our hushed exclamations, meticulously cataloging each piece. Exhaustion finally claimed me in the pre-dawn chill, my mind a dizzying kaleidoscope of discovery and implication as I collapsed onto my cot. The ensuing days were a whirlwind of fervent research and guarded excitement. We maintained strict secrecy, unwilling to unleash a media frenzy before grasping the true significance of our find. Yet, as I immersed myself deeper in the scroll's translation, a subtle disquiet began to thread through the exhilaration. The texts spoke not just of history, but of clandestine temples, rituals bordering on the arcane, powers that strained belief, and, most chillingly, of a shadowed fraternity sworn to safeguard these secrets across eternity. The fifth night after the unearthing, the shadows deepened menacingly. I was alone in the lab, hunched over a particularly complex passage, when voices intruded, low, guttural, laced with anger. Compelled by a wary curiosity, I crept to the window slit, peering through a gap in the canvas. The sight froze the blood in my veins. Two figures, cloaked in darkness, stood confronting one of our local laborers. Though their words were indistinct murmurs, their postures screamed intimidation. I watched, heart pounding a frantic rhythm as something, likely currency, was pressed into the laborer's hand before the men dissolved back into the night. Sleep became a stranger that night. Who were they? What was their purpose here? A desperate part of me clung to the hope of coincidence, but a colder, more rational core knew the connection was undeniable. The following morning, I drew Ben aside. "We need to heighten security," I urged, recounting the nocturnal encounter. "I believe someone knows about the artifacts, someone dangerous." Ben's face lost its color. "Gods, what should we do? Inform the Antiquities Police?" I shook my head, the weight of uncertainty heavy. "Not yet. We don't know the extent of this or who might be compromised. For now, absolute vigilance. Nothing leaves the secure container unless I'm physically present." Despite our tightened precautions, the atmosphere on site shifted, growing taut and suspicious. I felt unseen eyes tracking my movements. Conversations would cease abruptly upon my approach. Then, minor items began to vanish. A field notebook, a specialized pick. Small losses, yet cumulatively unnerving, fraying my nerves thin. The break-in point arrived a week later. Once more, I was working late, wrestling with the scroll's cryptic verses. The lab was steeped in silence, the rest of the team long retired. A sound from outside shattered the stillness. Stealthy footsteps betrayed by the crunch of gravel in the desert quiet. Instantly, I extinguished my lamp, melting behind a stack of supply crates, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. The canvas flap rustled open. Two silhouettes slipped inside, their features lost in the gloom. They moved with predatory certainty, heading directly for the field safe where the chest and its contents were secured. "Move quickly," one hissed, the sound sharp in the stillness, "before she or anyone else notices." Paralyzed by a cold dread, I watched as they manipulated the lock with unnerving skill. The safe clicked open. They retrieved the ancient box, transferring its precious burden into a modern backpack. Perhaps I shifted, perhaps I drew breath too sharply. A minute's sound, yet enough. One figure spun around, dark eyes probing the shadows where I hid. "Someone's here," the voice rasped. There was no time for thought, only instinct. I erupted from my hiding place, stumbling over equipment in a desperate scramble for the exit. Shouts erupted behind me, the thud of pursuing feet. I burst out into the vast, cool emptiness of the desert night, the air searing my lungs. No plan guided my flight, only the primal imperative to escape, to somehow shield the knowledge we had unearthed. How long I ran, I cannot say. My muscles screamed. My breath came in ragged gasps, but terror was a relentless spur. Finally, I found refuge in a small cluster of skeletal trees clinging to life around a meager spring, collapsing behind a weathered boulder, struggling to regain breath and clarity. What now? Where could I possibly turn? As if summoned by my silent plea, the low growl of an engine broke the silence. Headlights cut through the darkness. A jeep skidded to a halt nearby. Ben Carter leapt out, his face etched with panic. "Dr. Vance," he yelled into the night. "Eleanor, are you all right? They know. You have to get out of here." A wave of dizzying relief washed over me. I staggered out from my concealment. "Ben, thank heavens. They have the chest, the artifacts. We have to report this. We need to—" The words caught, strangled in my throat. From the passenger side of the Jeep, the two men from the lab emerged, their presence radiating quiet menace. Ben's expression crumpled. "I'm so sorry, Eleanor," he choked out, his voice thick with shame. They have my sister. I had no other way." I recoiled, the ground seeming to tilt beneath me. Betrayal, cold and sharp. There was nowhere left to run. The men advanced, their faces grimly resolute. "Dr. Vance," one addressed me, his tone unexpectedly calm, almost sorrowful. "We mean you no harm, but you have uncovered secrets far greater, far more perilous than you comprehend. Secrets that must remain buried." "Who are you people?" I demanded, forcing strength into my voice, battling the tremor of fear. "We are guardians," the second man stated simply. "Custodians of a knowledge ancient beyond reckoning. The artifacts you found are keys to forces that could shatter the world's equilibrium if misused." A hysterical laugh threatened to bubble up. It sounded utterly preposterous, torn from the pages of pulp fiction. Yet, the profound seriousness in their eyes, the averted gaze of Ben, choked with regret. It resonated with a terrifying internal logic. "So, what happens to me now?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The first man let out a slow breath. "Now, you face a choice. Accompany us. Learn the truth you have unwittingly brushed against. Aid us in its protection. Or—" The unspoken alternative hung heavy and final in the desert air. My gaze shifted from Ben's anguished face to the backpack containing the impossible artifacts, then out towards the immense, indifferent desert stretching to the horizon. In that stark moment, the quiet, ordered life of scholarship I had known felt irrevocably shattered. I drew a steadying breath, the cool night air a balm. "All right," I said, the decision settling within me. "I will go with you, but I demand answers, every single one." A flicker of relief crossed the men's stern features. They nodded. As they guided me towards the waiting jeep, I cast a final glance back towards the distant, sleeping excavation site. The place where Eleanor Vance, the archaeologist, had ceased to exist, making way for something unknown, something enmeshed in peril. Driving deeper into the star-dusted night, the ancient chest nestled securely between my captors. A single question echoed in the chambers of my mind. By unearthing the secrets of millennia past, had I irrevocably sealed my own destiny? Time alone held that answer. But of one thing I was certain. The predictable, dust-filled world of academic discovery would never hold me again. It began not as a noise, but as the ghost of one. A delicate friction overhead, the barest scrape, like worn leather dragged across rough stone. My gaze lifted from the laptop's sterile glow, my mug of lukewarm tea arrested mid-journey. Around me, the cavernous shell of the old mill hummed under the flat glare of fluorescent tubes. Then, clearer this time, undeniable, footfalls, measured, solid impacts pacing the floor directly above. A glance at my phone confirmed the hour, 8:47 p.m. Solitude was my only companion. I'd lingered, wrestling with inventory spreadsheets demanded by the head office come morning. The night watchman, old Silas, wouldn't materialize for another hour yet. The tread continued its slow march, a deliberate traverse from one end of the upper level to the unseen other. My pulse quickened, a frantic bird against my ribs. That floor. I knew its geography intimately, a desolate expanse populated only by the skeletal remains of machinery silent for decades. We ventured there solely for mandated roof access checks. My chair grated, a sharp shriek on the concrete, as I pushed back from the worn desk. Instantly, the footsteps ceased. Silence descended, thick and suffocating, as if the air itself had congealed. I rose, limbs protesting their long stillness. "Anyone there?" The question echoed, swallowed by the vast emptiness. No answer returned. Buildings like this groaned and sighed, settling their ancient bones, especially as night cooled the structure. Yet this hadn't been settling. This had been locomotion, distinct heel strikes, a purposeful trajectory. Drawn by reluctant curiosity, I moved towards the stairwell, my own steps loud counterpoints in the quiet. The metal door handle felt glacial beneath my palm. A moment's hesitation, a breath held, then I pulled it open. Darkness pooled within, relieved only by the faint crimson wash of an emergency exit sign. My fingers fumbled, found the switch. Fluorescent bars sputtered awake overhead with an electric hiss. "Is someone upstairs?" My voice climbed the concrete shaft, only to fall back unanswered. I began the ascent, each step a metallic clang against the treads. Reaching the second-floor landing, I paused, straining to hear. Nothing. The door to the upper level remained shut, as always. Locked. We kept it secured, this abandoned tier. My keys jingled, a small, nervous sound as I located the correct one. The mechanism yielded with a sharp, resonant click. I eased the door inward, wincing as corroded hinges screamed their reluctance. The second floor unfurled before me, a vast Stygian plain thick with dust, pierced only by weak moonlight filtering through grime-caked windows. Colossal shapes of forgotten machinery hulked like slumbering beasts, immense metal frames and frozen conveyor belts locked in obsolescence. The beam of my flashlight sliced the gloom, illuminating frantic swirls of disturbed motes. "Hello?" My voice felt small, absorbed by the immensity. I swept the light back and forth, vacant, precisely as expected. Still, the confirmation felt necessary. A soft, grating sound whispered from behind me. I pivoted, heart leaping into my throat. The flashlight beam slashed through empty air. Then I registered it. A heavy steel drum, one I distinctly recalled resting against the far wall mere moments ago, now occupied the center of the aisle between two looming presses, a good 3 feet from its original position. A tremor started in my hands. That drum was solid iron, easily requiring 2 men to shift. I had just walked past that exact spot. It had been against the wall. Retreating slowly, my light fixed on the inexplicably relocated object. My breathing roared in my ears. The drum remained stubbornly still. Another scrape, this time originating to my right. I spun towards the source. A hefty spanner, previously perched atop a dormant lathe, now lay inert in the middle of the concrete floor, a clear 20 feet away. "Who's there?" The words fractured. "This isn't amusing." Abruptly, the temperature plummeted. I saw my breath plume white in the torch beam, a sudden winter descending upon the space. Goose flesh prickled across my skin. Movement flickered at the periphery of my vision, a swift, dark current flowing between the static hulks of metal. I jerked the light towards it, catching nothing but stagnant air and dancing dust. My back encountered the cold brick wall. I hadn't even realized I was retreating. The stairwell door, my only sanctuary, lay 30 feet distant. I began to edge towards it, the flashlight beam a frantic metronome sweeping the shadows. Another shape darted past, closer this time, yet the light revealed only emptiness where it had been. 10 feet to the door. My heart hammered against my sternum, a frantic drumbeat I could feel in my jaw. A deafening crash exploded nearby, making me flinch violently. An old electrical control panel, bolted securely to a pillar, had torn free and smashed onto the floor. 50 pounds of solid metal, needing tools and effort for removal, now lay fractured on the concrete. It hadn't simply fallen. 5 feet. Almost there. The shadow seemed to multiply, flitting with increased speed, weaving between the machines in a grotesque game of hide and seek. The cold intensified, biting deep, setting my teeth chattering uncontrollably. My fingers closed around the blessed metal of the door handle. I wrenched it open, stumbling backward into the relative safety of the stairwell. Slamming the heavy door shut, I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaken so violently the key scraped uselessly against the lock face. Finally, it turned, the click echoing just as a monumental force slammed against the other side of the door. The impact vibrated through the steel, jarring my teeth. I staggered back, nearly tumbling down the stairs. A second blow struck, harder still, making the stout hinges groan in protest. Then, absolute silence. I didn't wait. I fled down the stairs, taking them in reckless bounds, the clatter of my descent echoing my panic. Bursting onto the main floor, I sprinted to my workstation. The laptop screen glowed, an island of normalcy in the encroaching dread. I snapped it shut, crammed it into my satchel. Snatching my coat, I heard it commence again. Footsteps overhead, but altered. No longer the slow, deliberate pacing. This was frantic, agitated running, back and forth, like a caged thing pacing its confines. I bolted for the main exit, leaving the lights burning defiantly against the night. The cool, exterior air struck my face like a physical blow as I erupted from the building. I didn't cease running until the sanctuary of my car embraced me. My hands trembled so fiercely it took 3 attempts to slot the key into the ignition. Pulling away from the deserted lot, my gaze was drawn involuntarily upward to the second-floor windows. For one heart-stopping instant, I perceived movement behind the filthy panes, an indistinct silhouette observing my departure. I reported sick the following day, and the one after, fabricating a tale of a vicious stomach ailment. The truth felt impossible to articulate, an invitation to ridicule, but the request for transfer to the new facility across town was typed with trembling fingers. Remaining in that edifice beneath that haunted upper floor was inconceivable. Even returning to the familiar daytime bustle, surrounded by colleagues, failed to dispel the unease. A persistent sensation lingered, a feeling that something waited above, patient and aware. Management approved the transfer. My final day in the old mill arrived 2 weeks later. While packing the last of my desk contents into a cardboard box, I heard them, the footsteps. That same measured, deliberate cadence drifted down from the second floor. Clutching my box, I walked out, resisting the urge to look back, severing my connection to that place. 3 months have passed. The old mill remains unvisited territory for me. Yet sometimes, ensconced in the quiet solitude of night, phantom footfalls echo in my hearing. When my eyes inevitably drift ceilingward, expecting only plaster and beams, a sliver of dread persists. What if, one night, something gazes back? I delved into the building's past, seeking rational anchors. Erected in '43, operational until the original company folded in '89. Workplace accidents, yes, the grim but mundane casualties of mid-century industry. Nothing, however, illuminated the chilling reality of my experience. Veteran employees shared anecdotes, tools migrating inexplicably, whispers of sound, localized zones of unnatural cold, always recounted with a dismissive chuckle, filed under the heading of workplace folklore. My encounter transcended folklore. Those fleeting shadows possessed substance, the autonomous movement of the drum, the wrench. These were not imagined. That heavy control panel did not merely succumb to gravity. Something shared that space with me, something capable of manipulating the physical world, yet preferring concealment. Something that seemed to probe, to toy with my fear, gauging my reaction. I replay that night incessantly, dissecting every sensation, every shadow. Could a human intruder have orchestrated it? Someone adept at stealth, at unseen manipulation? The thought crumbles against the memory of the bone-deep cold, the inhuman swiftness of the shadows, the sheer impossible force that battered the stairwell door. No, the presence haunting that upper floor was not born of flesh and blood. Of this, I am now unshakably certain. Occasionally, my route home takes me past the old mill. A foolish test of courage, perhaps, proving to myself the fear no longer holds sway. Yet, I never make that detour after twilight falls, and my foot invariably presses harder on the accelerator as the second-story windows slide past. The building still functions, filled with the diurnal rhythm of work, but I observe now how assiduously the second floor is avoided unless necessity dictates otherwise. Maintenance calls for that level languish, passed from hand to reluctant hand. Even those who scoff at the legends circumvent that floor whenever feasible. They sense it, though they refuse to name it. That oppressive stillness, as if the very atmosphere holds its breath. The persistent prickle of unseen observation. Contemplating an official report feels futile. The police, management, they would demand proof, tangible evidence. I possess only my narrative, a tale of impossibilities witnessed in a deserted chamber. So, the story remains confined within me, alongside other anxieties and uncertainties. But sometimes, working late in the sterile brightness of the new facility, a sound from above, ventilation cycling, the structure settling, wind buffeting the roof, will trigger a momentary relapse. For that fleeting second, before reason reasserts itself, I'm transported back to the old mill, to that second floor with its dormant giants and spectral dancers, back to the instant the foundations of my reality fractured. Because I learned that night that footsteps in an empty building aren't always benign creaks. Sometimes they belong to something that desires your attention, that beckons you upward. Sometimes, if fortune favors you, this realization dawns before you turn the handle, before you breach the threshold, before you confront precisely what has been anticipating your arrival in the gloom. Fortune favored me. Whatever resided there permitted my escape. Yet the unsettling conviction remains that it was merely amusement, the predatory indulgence of a cat releasing the mouse only to prolong the chase. Had it truly intended, reaching that door would have been impossible. The old mill stands, operates, guards its secrets within that shunned second story. And sometimes, driving past as dusk bleeds into night, I glance towards those grimy windows and wonder, is something watching still? Do those shadows continue their macabre ballet between the machines? Do those footsteps persist, pacing, awaiting the next curious soul drawn upward by the sound? Answers elude me, but one truth remains stark. I will never return to that upper floor. Certain doors are best left unopened. Certain enigmas are best left undisturbed, because venturing into shadowed places in search of answers can lead to the discovery that something, in turn, has been searching for you. And sometimes that something follows you home. I still navigate the world of factories, still occasionally burn the midnight oil over reports, but now prudence dictates my choices. Building schematics are scrutinized before I accept any position. My office must reside on the ground floor. And should I ever again hear footsteps overhead in the after-hours silence, there will be no investigation. I will gather my belongings, proceed calmly to my vehicle, and depart without haste. For I know with chilling certainty that not all vacant rooms are truly empty, and not all footfalls belong to the living. The first tremor of wrongness arrived as a sound, a low, abrasive grating from the cellar depths. It echoed like tormented metal being forced across bare concrete, a brutal friction against the Saturday afternoon quiet. I, Elias, was utterly alone, ostensibly tracing the building's electrical veins. I froze. Breath caught tight in my chest, the silence amplifying the rasp until every nerve ending prickled, a physiological alarm. Weeks prior, I'd acquired this commercial shell, an older structure nestled in a neighborhood breathing potential. The price seemed an invitation, a chance to sculpt a modest retail haven or lease it to some local enterprise. During the perfunctory walk-through, the agent, naturally, had glossed over the basement's peculiar annex, a sequestered garage space. Its existence remained unknown to me until later, when a friend and I, armed with measuring tapes, stumbled upon a narrow, unassuming door tucked discreetly behind a fuse panel. Rusted hinges groaned in protest as we forced it open, revealing a flight of rough-hewn concrete steps descending into shadow. The air that met us was stagnant, heavy with the odor of damp stone and time undisturbed. My phone's beam sliced through the subterranean dark. The garage wasn't cavernous. It might accommodate a single modest automobile, perhaps a pair of motorcycles side by side. The floor, a mosaic of cracks webbing across the uneven concrete, felt treacherous underfoot. Viridian blooms of mold crept up the sweating walls, and a scattering of archaic tools lay abandoned in one corner like forgotten relics. No functioning light fixture graced the space, only a naked socket, its wiring frayed and ancient, the bulb long surrendered. Seeing no immediate utility in this neglected pocket of the property, I mentally shelved it, turning my attention elsewhere for the ensuing days. Then arrived the weekend dedicated to dissecting the building's electrical anatomy, a necessary exorcism of potential code violations. Beginning near the main entrance, I methodically tested switches, probed outlets, scrutinized the primary breaker box. All seemed superficially sound. Eventually, recollection dragged me back to the basement anomaly. Tools in hand, I descended the uneven stairs, my soles whispering on the slick, cool surface. The temperature plummeted noticeably. The miasma of mildew intensified, clinging to the back of my throat. Illuminating the periphery with my flashlight, I scanned walls and ceiling. Tucked in a corner, I located a secondary fuse panel, its metal cabinet blushing with rust at the edges. It yielded only to a determined tug. Inside, a chaotic mismatch of fuses greeted me, some appearing positively antique, one socket starkly empty. A muttered curse on the previous owner's negligence escaped my lips, and precisely then, the grating returned. It emanated from my left, near the far wall where a dilapidated shelf slumped against the concrete. A slow, rhythmic scrape, metal dragged across the rough floor, my chest constricted. I swung the flashlight's beam towards the shelf, but stillness reigned. Anyone there? My voice, thin and reedy, bounced off the stone. Silence answered, broken only by the faint, rhythmic weeping of water somewhere within the building's hidden arteries. Self-reassurance kicked in. Echoes, perhaps? Settling foundations? I forced myself towards the shelf, displacing dusty boxes, peering behind it. Nothing but damp, stained concrete stared back. A knot of disquiet tightened in my gut, but I returned to the fuse box. Minutes later, the sound recurred, undeniably louder this time, imbued with a greater weight. A visceral crawl tickled my skin. My screwdriver clattered to the floor as I spun around. Again, empty space met my gaze. The palpable sense of not being alone became suffocating. I paced the perimeter slowly, flashlight beam carving tentative arcs through the oppressive darkness, probing corners swallowed by shadow. My own pulse hammered a frantic rhythm against my eardrums. No intruder, no disturbed object, nothing. An urgent need to escape gripped me. My limbs felt leaden, my hand slick with sweat around the flashlight's grip. Each footstep seemed to detonate in the confined space. Ascending back into the mundane light felt like surfacing from underwater. Plumbing, I told myself. Shifting debris. Logical explanations warred with the chilling reality of the sound. The unease lingered, a persistent shadow throughout the day. By evening, the possibility of intrusion solidified. A vagrant seeking shelter, perhaps? The building, still secured with its original, inadequate locks, felt vulnerable. The thought of someone hiding in that subterranean gloom festered. I resolved to conduct a more thorough search the following morning. Sleep offered little respite, punctuated by phantom echoes of scraping metal just as consciousness ebbed. Dawn found me pulling on work clothes, propelled by a grim determination. I armed myself with a more potent flashlight and, feeling slightly foolish but needing the reassurance, a compact crowbar. Parking directly out front, I noted the Sunday morning stillness of the street. Unlocking the main entrance, I made a beeline for the basement. The familiar musty odor greeted me like a stale shroud the moment I breached the threshold to the lower level. Stairs groaned their familiar complaint under my weight as I descended with deliberate quiet. At the foot of the stairs, I paused, sweeping the powerful beam of the new flashlight across the space. It cut deeper into the shadows, revealing walls stark and bare, the floor filmed with undisturbed dust save for my own tracks from the previous day. I meticulously examined the shelf, the corners, the space behind the fuse box, the underside of the ancient tool bench. Nothing amiss. For half an hour, I probed and prodded, pulling the shelf fully away from the wall, kicking aside loose detritus, listening with an almost painful intensity. Silence. A confusing blend of relief and frustration washed over me. Relief at the absence of threat, frustration at the unresolved mystery. Turning my attention to the fuse panel, I installed a replacement for the missing fuse, tested the circuits, trying to ignore the persistent chill that seeped into my arms. By the time I concluded, hunger gnawed. It was nearing midday. As I mounted the stairs, halfway to the top, the metallic scrape ripped through the silence from below. Sudden, sharp. I nearly fumbled the flashlight, whirling around to blast the beam down the stairwell. Empty concrete floor stared back, mocking me. A tremor started in my hands. The noise was undeniably real, originating from the very spot I'd occupied moments before. Hesitantly, I descended once more, my throat tight and dry. "If there's someone down here," I called out, voice strained, "I'm calling the police." The ensuing silence felt heavier, charged. I retraced my steps, sweeping the light into every recess, under every object. Nothing. The sound did not repeat. Defeated, nerves frayed thin, I retreated upstairs, slamming the basement door shut and securing the lock. In the subsequent days, avoidance became my strategy. I immersed myself in the upper levels, painting walls, mending window frames, conferring with a flooring contractor. Yet, the basement remained a psychic weight. Each time I passed its door, an involuntary shiver traced my spine, a somatic memory of metal on concrete urging caution. The following weekend, necessity forced another descent. Supplies needed storage, and the basement, despite its unsettling soundtrack, offered potential space I couldn't afford to waste. Donning a heavier jacket, I deployed a robust work light on a long extension cord, ensuring my phone was fully charged. A small pocket knife rested in my pocket, a flimsy talisman against the unknown. I positioned the work light near the fuse box, its bright, steady glow banishing most of the gloom, offering a fragile sense of security despite its occasional flicker. Clipboard in hand, I began measuring the dimensions, jotting down figures, yet my attention remained divided, constantly flicking glances over my shoulder, anticipating the sound that never came. Only my own movements and the ceaseless drip from hidden pipes broke the quiet. An hour passed. Measurements complete, I wiped sweat from my brow, the cold air paradoxically inducing a nervous perspiration. As I prepared to depart, the work light executed a more pronounced flicker, dimming drastically for a few heartbeats before flaring back to life. In that fleeting moment of reduced illumination against the far wall, I perceived it, a shape. Indistinct, yet undeniably the silhouette of a standing figure. I froze, heart slamming against my ribs. I whipped the flashlight beam towards the spot. Empty wall, peeling paint, nothing. Clutching the work light, I crossed the space, probing the area with both beams. No anomaly, no disturbance in the dust, no sign of presence. I fought to regulate my breathing, the tremor returning to my hands. The cloying scent of mold felt suffocating now, the walls pressing inwards. A shadow. I reasoned desperately. A trick of the light, my own reflection caught at an odd angle. But the goose flesh rising on my arms and the nape of my neck screamed otherwise. Hurriedly, I began gathering my equipment. And then, the scrape, louder than ever before, closer, directly behind me, the unmistakable sound of something immensely heavy being dragged across the concrete floor. I spun around with violent speed, nearly dropping the work light. Nothing. My heart hammered wildly, nausea surged. Forcing a semblance of control, I backed slowly towards the stairs, eyes locked on the center of the garage. The sound held its peace. Reaching the door, I extinguished the lights, slammed it shut, and twisted the lock home. Now, any descent into that space is fraught with a familiar tension that coils in my chest. My palms grow damp, my pulse quickens, my gaze darts ceaselessly towards the periphery. Sometimes, standing at the top of the stairs, I fancy I hear a faint, distant scraping. Other times, midway down, a flicker of movement teases the edge of my vision. Each time, investigation reveals nothing, yet the space never feels truly empty. It feels occupied, watched by something lurking just beyond the light, waiting for me to leave, or perhaps for me to venture closer. I've sought rational explanations, examining pipes for loose fittings, walls for animal ingress, floors for shifting elements. Nothing fits. Everything appears solid, merely aged and uncared for. Doubt whispers. Perhaps it's stress, the financial weight of renovations, the pressure to make this venture profitable. But the auditory evidence remains stark, undeniable. The dragging scrape is too specific, too visceral to be dismissed as plumbing rattles or settling groans, and the fleeting silhouette. When inquiries arise about the property's progress, my replies are vague. Coming along, needs work. The basement's secret remains mine. I have no desire to be the proprietor of the local haunted building. This town collects rumors like dust, yet the uncertainty gnaws. Security cameras have crossed my mind, but the prospect of capturing definitive proof of something in that darkness paradoxically terrifies me more than the ambiguity. For the present, the basement remains locked. A sturdier padlock now adorns the reinforced doorframe. Upstairs, the building is mostly silent, but occasionally, in moments of profound quiet, I think I catch that faint, dragging signature sound from below. A chill, sharp and immediate, pierces me every time. It has reached the point where simply walking past that basement door induces a visceral reluctance. Future plans for the subterranean space have evaporated. If descent can be avoided, it is. When necessity dictates otherwise, my movements are swift, purposeful. Get in, retrieve, get out. My chest tightens, my hearing strains for the slightest aberration. I leave the door ajar behind me, a guaranteed escape route. The air remains perpetually cold, regardless of the season outside, and the scent of decay clings stubbornly to my clothes long after I've surfaced. This is the uneasy truce. A hidden garage, steeped in damp and shadow, smelling perpetually of earth and neglect. Unexplained noises manifest without warning. Phantom shapes flicker at the edge of sight. Moments of near certainty dissolve into frustrating ambiguity. The tension is a constant, wearying companion. What resides down there, I cannot say. I only know that each step onto those concrete stairs feels like trespassing in a place that wants me gone. And every time I leave, locking the door behind me, I carry the unshakable sensation of unseen eyes following my retreat. I own the building. Yes, I intend to make it work. But down there, in the cold and the dark, I am convinced I am not the sole occupant. Derelict structures whispered forgotten histories. A siren song I, Alara, found impossible to resist. The allure lay in their stillness, monuments abandoned by the relentless march of time, ripe for rediscovery. Though shared explorations held their own thrill, this particular venture demanded solitude. It was a skeletal warehouse squatting on the town's frayed edge, a landmark passed countless times yet never breached. Its facade promised years of neglect. Vacant window sockets gaped, and concrete skin wept graffiti tears. Precisely the kind of forgotten space that ignited my soul. Leaving my car discreetly several streets away, I approached on foot, the familiar cocktail of exhilaration and trepidation fizzing in my veins. The warehouse swelled as I drew near, a colossal silhouette blotting the bruised twilight. A miasma hung in the air, stale oil, metallic decay, and something else, fundamentally damp, vaguely vegetal. My flashlight's beam sprang to life, a nervous white blade slicing the gloom as I aimed for a splintered door, bowed and weary, seemingly untouched for an age. Crossing the threshold felt like breaching a membrane between worlds. The city's ambient hum vanished, absorbed by a profound hush broken only by the granular crunch of my boots on debris-strewn concrete. Motes of disturbed dust danced wildly in my flashlight's cone, each step raising miniature ghosts. The interior vastness dwarfed its external impression. Corridors formed by rusted, hulking machinery stretched into shadow, flanked by leaning towers of pallets shrouded in grime and gossamer veils of cobwebs. I navigated the labyrinthine aisles with measured steps, the beam of light my only guide through the Stygian depths. The silence thickened, becoming almost tactile, pressing in. Phantom noises teased the edge of hearing, infinitesimal creaks, the scurry of imagined feet, freezing me mid-step, breath held captive. Each turn revealed only more emptiness, more shadows animated by my probing light. Yet deeper I went, drawn by the magnetism of decay. A catalogued scattered tools like metallic bones, twisted scraps of unidentifiable purpose, a congregation of empty oil drums standing sentinel in the dust. Gradually, the initial tension eased, replaced by the pure absorption of discovery, examining each relic with quiet reverence. Then, rounding a stack of warped crates, the rhythm of my heart fractured. A figure stood mere yards away, starkly present, regarding me. Older, etched with neglect, draped in clothes that seemed molded to him by dirt and time, a scruffy beard obscuring his jawline. He offered no greeting, no movement, simply pinned me with an unnerving, vacant intensity. Homeless, perhaps? A squatter? But the thought felt inadequate. No nest of blankets, no scattered possessions hinted at habitation. He seemed less an occupant and more an installation, placed there, waiting. A hesitant step back. My flashlight beam trembled upward slightly. "Apologies," I managed, the words tight in my throat. "I didn't realize anyone was here." Silence answered, stretching taut. His gaze remained locked, unwavering, his face a mask. A chill, slick and unwelcome, traced my spine. Every primal instinct screamed retreat, urged me to pivot and flee, but my feet were leaden anchors. Finally, a voice emerged, low and rough-edged, little more than a desiccated whisper. "You shouldn't be here." I swallowed against a sudden drought. "Just looking around. I meant no harm." He executed a slow, deliberate shake of his head, those unblinking eyes never releasing mine. "It isn't safe. Not for your kind." A tremor ran through me. The words weren't overtly menacing, yet they resonated with a chilling certainty, a weight of unspoken knowledge that made my skin prickle. "Right. I'll leave," I stated, striving for a composure I didn't feel. Another backward step. He remained immobile, offering no resistance, but as I turned, his voice, softer still, snagged me. "They're watching." Watching. The question of who died on my lips. Ignorance felt safer. I turned resolutely, forcing a measured pace back through the shadowed aisles, a performance of calm. The instant his presence receded behind a towering machine, control shattered. I ran. Boots hammered concrete, heart detonated against ribs. The vast emptiness amplified each frantic footfall, air thick, choking. The door, blessed exit, loomed. I burst through it, stumbling into the cool balm of the night air, gulping it down like water. My pulse thundered a frantic rhythm against my eardrums. I scanned the vicinity, half expecting the gaunt sentinel framed in the doorway. Nothing. Only the silent, brooding mass of the warehouse. The walk back to the car was a tightrope walk over a chasm of fear, my mind desperately rationalizing. Just a strange man, a weird encounter, nothing more. But as my hand closed on the car door handle, a final glance back froze the blood in my veins. High above, in the jagged maw of a second-floor window, a figure stood, motionless, watching. It wasn't the man from inside. The silhouette possessed an alien geometry, taller, broader, unnervingly rigid against the fractured glass, utterly still, utterly focused, on me. A cold sweat bloomed across my skin. Without conscious thought, I scrambled into the driver's seat, ignition catching, engine roaring to life. I drove, accelerating hard, refusing the urge to check the rearview mirror, terrified of confirming its continued vigil. Distance, that was the only imperative. Yet, days melt into nights, and the warehouse remains a psychic anchor, tugging at the edges of my perception. The encounter refuses to fade, festering into a persistent dread. Sometimes, in the deepest quiet, the phantom pressure of unseen eyes returns, a cold promise hanging in the dark, waiting. My knuckles bleach against the steering wheel's cracked vinyl. A flicker in the rear view. There it is again, a brief condensation of shadow huddled on the rear bench. Gone, the instant my gaze snaps to the actual seat. Nothing resides there, nothing ever does. Yet, a visceral certainty tightens the cords of my neck, raises goose flesh along my forearms like tiny, cold needles. Deliveries, years of them now, had accustomed me to the solitude of the road, the quiet hum, the liberty. But lately, unease coils in my gut. This rattling metal box, my chariot of commerce, has developed a creeping sentience, and the dread is becoming unbearable. 6 months back, I acquired this beast from a dusty lot on the edge of town. The salesman, all cheap cologne and shifting eyes, mentioned a prior owner, an incident a few months previous. Details remained deliberately opaque. Inside, the air hung thick with the ghosts of stale coffee and decomposing upholstery foam. The headliner drooped like weary eyelids. A tear in the driver's seat offered an occasional, unwelcome jab to my thigh. The dashboard bore a spiderweb of fractures. The radio wheezed static more often than music. Still, it was the sum of my savings, the necessary vessel for hauling cardboard effigies and plastic crates. Initially, it performed its duties without protest. No alarming rattles, no sudden deaths mid-traffic. It scraped through inspection. It drank oil, yes, but that felt like a manageable sin. It was enough. The strangeness first manifested during a pre-dawn run. 5 a.m., the city still slumbering under a shroud of darkness. Just the sodium glow of street lamps and my own headlights slicing through the void. Then, a faint scritching from behind, the sound of fabric disturbed. A glance in the mirror revealed a definite form, hunched, leaning forward from the center of the bench. My heart vaulted into my throat. I spun around. Emptiness greeted me, the worn fabric, the slack seat belt draped across it. Nothing more. Back to the mirror, only the reflection of the vacant seat. Exhaustion, I reasoned, shaking my head. A deficit of caffeine. For a time, denial was my shield. I immersed myself in the rhythm of the job. Early starts, the heft of boxes, manifests checked, routes plotted, the open road. 30 stops on a good day. fewer when the cargo bulked large or the miles stretched between towns. The shape remained an infrequent visitor then, always peripheral, a fleeting smudge against the upholstery. It never held when confronted directly. A trick of light, perhaps? Imagination working overtime? It felt too substantial for either, not in my stomach with cold certainty. Over lukewarm vending machine coffee, amidst the scarred formica of the break room, I ventured my story. The shape, the jump scare reflex, laughter met my confession. "Mate, probably your coat sliding about," one offered, wiping crumbs from his chin. Another drawled, "Too much alone time, Leo. Get yourself a ride along." Jokes about self-induced phantoms, about the tricks tired eyes play on graveyard shifts. I forced a chuckle, joining their mirth, but the cold knot of wrongness remained undissolved. Weeks bled into months, and the visitations grew bolder. Sometimes, navigating a sunlit, bustling street, I'd catch that dark outline in the mirror's frame. My legs would stiffen, my grip crushing the wheel. A swift look back, the seat mocking in its emptiness. I'd try to rationalize, but the van felt different, burdened, as if carrying an unregistered passenger. I even found myself checking the tire pressure, inspecting the suspension, searching for a mundane explanation for the perceived weight. Nothing amiss. One rain-lashed evening, closing out near 7. The sky bled darkness, asphalt slick and treacherous, the windscreen perpetually fogging. Weariness clung to me like the damp air. I pulled up to the final drop, a poorly lit apartment block exiting into the gloom. My phone's beam cut a weak path as I navigated puddles towards the van's rear. Opening the cargo doors released a peculiar chill, colder than the sodden air outside. My breath plumed visibly within the van's confines, illuminated by the phone. Unnatural, with the engine still warm. Shrugging it off, I hefted the required parcel, my fingers trembling slightly, nearly losing my grip. Delivery complete, a muttered good night to the shadowed doorway and back to the driver's seat. Inside, beadlets of moisture dotted the rearview mirror's surface. Inside, the glass, like damp fingerprints, the windscreen, the side mirrors, dry. Only the central eye held the condensation. A band tightened around my chest. I snatched a rag from the passenger floor, wiped furiously. A backward glance confirmed the seat's vacancy. Eyes squeezed shut, a ragged breath drawn, a command whispered, "Calm down." The drive back to the depot was punctuated by an incessant prickling at my nape, the phantom weight of someone leaning close. The next day dawned without incident, the mirror remaining stubbornly empty until midday, cruising a sun-drenched highway between townships. A routine check before signaling a lane change, and there it was. A stark silhouette filling the space behind me. Tall, perhaps canted towards the window. A strangled yell escaped me as I instinctively yanked the wheel. The van lurched violently rightward, tires screaming, narrowly avoiding a collision with the startled compact car whose horn blared indignantly. I wrestled the van straight, eyes locked forward, refusing the mirror's call. Tremors racked my hands. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Deceleration, the next exit ramp, a hasty swerve into a gas station forecourt. I killed the engine in a far corner, then slowly, deliberately turned my head. Nothing. A hand dragged across my sweat-slicked face. My shirt clung damply to my back. Curious glances from the pumps. I flung the door open, the slam echoing slightly, and began pacing, circling the van, needing the movement, the air, a futile kick at a tire. Paranoid. The word tasted like ash. Back inside, the remainder of the route blurred, my nerves frayed wires. That night, sleep offered no refuge, my bedroom corners populated by imagined watching shapes. In the weeks that followed, I resorted to stratagems. A small towel draped over the rearview mirror became my shield. Cracked, I mumbled to my boss, waiting on a replacement. He shrugged, concerned only with timely deliveries. Driving blind felt perilous, yet the absence of the shape brought a fragile peace. But lane changes demanded sight, and each brief lift of the towel renewed the insidious dread. So it remained mostly covered. Selling the van wasn't an option. The loan loomed large, and funds for a replacement were non-existent. My colleagues' teasing continued, their own vehicular experiences stubbornly mundane. Get some tunes going, they advised, podcasts, anything. I tried, flooding the cabin with roaring guitars and mindless chatter. It muted the internal monologue, but failed to dispel the palpable sense of not being alone. One afternoon, a short hop across town. Traffic coagulated, crawling along the boulevard at 10 miles per hour. Then, the acrid tang of cigarette smoke, sharp and fresh. Impossible. I don't smoke. The windows were sealed tight against the heat, AC humming. I killed the ventilation. The cloying scent persisted, thick as if someone had just exhaled over my shoulder. A nervous flick of my eyes to the side mirror revealed only the slow procession of cars. I risked the rear view. The towel I'd hung there was gone, forgotten, and the shape was back, closer now, looming directly behind my seat. My pulse became a frantic drum against my eardrums. Trapped, bumper to bumper. Sweat beaded on my brow, threatening to drip. The radio's chatter seemed distant, submerged. The outline remained static, an obsidian presence. A sudden horn blast jolted me. Traffic ahead had surged forward. Accelerator pressed, the van lurched. Another glance. Gone. The smoke dissipated. Relief warred with a dawning realization. My breathing was rapid, shallow, my grip on the wheel a white-knuckled vice. I pulled over at the first opportunity, finding refuge in a deserted grocery store lot. My stomach churned. Leaning my forehead against the wheel, I muttered, "Enough, this is enough." A swig of water, a deep breath, and a reluctant decision. Finish the day's run. 3 stops remained, the paycheck essential. But a plan formed. Talk to the boss. Plead for a temporary company vehicle. Cite mechanical troubles. Maybe sell this cursed thing. Keep it parked. Anything. That evening, back at the depot, I spun my tale of mechanical woes. My boss conceded, granting me a few days in a company van, but emphasized its temporary nature. Those vehicles, larger and newer, were reserved. My personal van issues were my own to resolve, and swiftly. Driving the company rig felt like surfacing for air. Functional AC, a clear radio, no spectral passengers in the mirror, no phantom smoke, no inexplicable chills. Freedom. But after 3 days, the question came, "Your van sorted, Leo?" I lied. "Yes," I said. The reprieve was over. My stomach plummeted. That night, the keys on my kitchen table seemed malevolent, mocking my impending return. The following morning, I slid back into my old van, pausing before turning the key. A deliberate scan of the back seat confirmed its emptiness. The engine sputtered, caught, then settled into its familiar, rough idle. The route was short, confined to the city limits. For 2 hours, normalcy reigned. A fragile hope began to bloom. Perhaps the brake had reset whatever frayed connection existed between my nerves and this machine. Then, approaching a familiar intersection, the light turned red. I slowed, checked my mirrors, side, then the central rear view. It was there. Closer than ever before it felt, consuming most of the reflected space. Ice traced its way up my scalp. My breath hitched. Green light. I drove through, propelled by reflex, pulse throbbing violently in my neck. Looking back was impossible now. Eyes glued to the road ahead, ignoring the mirror's silent testimony. A tingling numbness spread through my hands from the force of my grip. A scream built in my chest, alongside the desperate urge to abandon the van and run. Last package delivered, I drove straight back to the warehouse, bypassing the usual break room banter. Clocked out, fled. The drive home was an exercise in controlled terror, furtive glances at the mirror revealing only emptiness, yet the feeling persisted. A pressure, tangible, against the back of my seat. Parked before my apartment building, engine silenced, I sat enveloped by the quiet hum of the streetlights. Then, a distinct sensation. The seat behind me yielded slightly, accompanied by the whisper of fabric rubbing against itself. My eyes shot to the mirror. A flicker, the briefest impression of a head and shoulders, static, defined only by its darkness against the dim interior. Then gone. I nearly bolted, but forced a semblance of calm, rolling up windows, locking doors, exiting with measured steps. My legs felt like water as I ascended the stairs. Sleep was a battlefield, thoughts circling relentlessly around that silhouette, a weight settling deep in my chest. Now, sunk into my threadbare couch, the van keys rest heavy on the table, glinting under the lamplight. Echoes of the chill, the spectral silhouette, the phantom tobacco linger. My colleagues offer jokes, not solace. Another vehicle is beyond my means. I oscillate between abandoning this livelihood and preserving my fraying sanity. Part of me screams, quit. Another whispers about rent, about survival. But each remembered pressure against the seat back, each fleeting glimpse in that cursed mirror chips away at my resolve. My heart still performs that frantic rhythm at the thought. How much more can I endure? Tomorrow mandates another early start, another lonely drive. I resist the urge, yet the bills demand payment. The ending remains unwritten, shrouded. For now, I'll court sleep, praying the darkness behind my eyelids remains empty, unlike the space waiting for me in the back seat of my van. The cab door sighed open, admitting a draft of rain-chilled air and a man whose presence felt like a discordant note in the night's quiet symphony. His suit, a shadow of expensive tailoring, seemed misplaced amidst the flickering neon and damp decay of this particular city artery, especially past midnight. Yet, it wasn't the incongruity of his attire that pricked my unease. It was the frantic ballet of his eyes and the destination he eventually murmured, a nebulous point miles beyond the urban sprawl, out where the streetlights surrendered to darkness. As the tires spun a whisper on the wet asphalt, pulling away from the curb, a certainty settled deep and cold within me. This journey would deviate sharply from the mundane. where we headed. I aimed for casual, my gaze meeting his fleetingly in the rearview mirror. A beat of silence, punctuated only by the erratic tap-tapping of his fingers against his knee. Just drive north. I'll provide specifics en route. A curt nod was my reply as I merged into the sparse flow of late-night traffic. Rain slicked the streets, transforming the glow of signs into impressionistic smears on the pavement. My eyes kept returning to the mirror, studying the man behind me. Middle-aged, strands of silver threading his temples. A face that could have been handsome were it not clenched like a fist against some invisible pressure. We rode wrapped in silence, the world outside reduced to the rhythmic swoosh of tires on drenched roads and the intermittent, useless crackle from the dispatch unit. The usual driver's instinct to bridge the quiet with small talk withered under his palpable tension. This man, I sensed, had no interest in discussing the drizzle. As the city's frayed edges gave way to sparser landscapes, his voice finally broke the stillness. Next right. There's an old farmhouse, perhaps 20 miles down this way. I obeyed, maneuvering the cab onto a narrow, two-lane ribbon of asphalt that vanished into absolute black. The comfort and glow of civilization was long gone, leaving only the sweep of my headlights and the dim instrumentation to pierce the gloom. A fair distance from the city lights, I ventured, curiosity overriding caution. A non-committal grunt was his only response, his gaze fixed forward. Sometimes, he added after a moment, his voice flat, what you think is home isn't. The enigmatic remark did little to soothe the disquiet churning within me. My knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. Every pothole jolted, every curve felt like a potential ambush. Dwellings became scarce, replaced by vast unseen fields and the skeletal silhouettes of forgotten barns. So, I tried again, forcing a lightness I didn't feel. What sort of business draws you out to the sticks this late? He shifted, a subtle movement, and I tracked his hand as it slid inside his jacket. My pulse leaped. Weapon? But it reappeared clutching only a small silver flask. He took a deep swallow before answering. The word clipped. Business, the variety best handled discreetly. I swallowed, my throat suddenly parched. What clandestine dealings demanded such isolation? Certainly nothing legitimate. Regret began to bloom, a bitter taste mingling with the fear, but turning back felt impossible now. We were adrift in the darkness, miles from anywhere, and the meter was climbing steadily. The fare was needed. Minutes crawled by, each one stretching thin and taut. The silence inside the cab thickened, becoming almost suffocating, broken only by the radio's persistent static hiss. I fiddled with the dial, a futile gesture seeking connection, but only emptiness answered. We were truly beyond reach. "Turn here," Kalen directed suddenly, gesturing towards a dirt track barely discernible from the surrounding wilderness. I slowed, easing the vehicle onto the rutted path. My headlights momentarily illuminated a weathered plank nailed to a tree. No trespassing. Private property. "You positive this is the place?" The nervousness was undeniable in my voice now. He leaned forward, his proximity unsettling. "I am. Keep going." The track snaked deeper into dense woods, branches scraping like fingernails along the cab's flanks, stones pinging sharply against the undercarriage. Getting stranded here was a chilling prospect. Abruptly, the trees parted, revealing a clearing. At its heart stood a farmhouse, ancient and decrepit, paint peeling like sunburnt skin, shutters hanging at drunken angles. No lights shone, no other vehicles were present. It looked utterly abandoned, surrendered to time and neglect. "Stop here," Kalen ordered. I cut the engine, its dying rumble swallowed instantly by the profound stillness. He remained seated, leaning back, eyes shut. A moment passed. Sir? Al?" I prompted hesitantly. "We've arrived. That's 8750. His eyes snapped open, fixing me with an unnerving, laser-like focus. "We're not finished. Kill the engine. Wait." A knot of pure, icy fear tightened in my stomach. "Look, mister, I don't know what this is about, but I'm not comfortable. How about I just drive you back to the city? Call it square?" His hand moved again, back inside the tailored jacket. This time, it emerged holding not a flask, but the cold, unmistakable shape of a handgun. My breath caught, trapped in my throat as he leveled it towards me. "Turn off the engine," he repeated, his voice chillingly calm, devoid of inflection. "And don't bother with the radio. There's no signal." With hands that trembled, betraying my fear, I twisted the key. Silence descended, absolute and profound. The only illumination now came from the indifferent moon, casting long, distorted shadows across the overgrown yard, transforming familiar shapes into monstrous suggestions. "Good," he murmured, lowering the weapon slightly, though not holstering it. "Now, we wait." "Wait for what?" My voice was a strained whisper. He offered no answer, his gaze sweeping the darkness beyond the windshield. I followed his line of sight, straining my own eyes, searching the impenetrable black for whatever he anticipated. Time stretched, each second an eternity measured in heartbeats. Then a flicker. Movement at the edge of the woods. Another vehicle, lights extinguished, materialized from the trees. It rolled to a silent stop beside us. Two figures emerged, dark shapes against the darker background. Even in the pallid moonlight, I could see they were armed. Kalen finally opened his door, stepping out into the night to meet them. Their voices were low murmurs, swallowed by the vast emptiness, indecipherable. I sat rigid, paralyzed by fear, scarcely daring to breathe. It felt like hours, though it was likely mere minutes before Kalen returned, sliding back into the passenger seat. The other car reversed soundlessly, melting back into the forest from which it had emerged. "Take me back," he said, his tone utterly mundane, as if we'd merely paused for roadside coffee. My hands shook as I fumbled the key back into the ignition, the engine roaring back to life, unnaturally loud in the wake of the silence. My mind raced, trying to process the fragmented scene. A clandestine exchange, drugs, weapons. Whatever transaction I had peripherally witnessed, I wanted no deeper knowledge of it. The return journey was steeped in a heavy, oppressive silence. The gun was out of sight, but its presence lingered, a palpable weight in the confined space. As the first familiar glows of the city reappeared on the horizon, he spoke again. "You handled yourself well tonight, Al," he observed, his tone almost conversational. "Your discretion will be rewarded." I could only manage a numb nod, words failing me. When we finally stopped before a nondescript apartment block on a quiet street, he pressed a thick fold of bills into my hand, far exceeding the metered fare. "Remember," he said, his voice dropping slightly as he opened the door. "You saw nothing, heard nothing, for your own well-being and that of your family." The threat, veiled but unmistakable, hung in the air. I watched him melt into the building's entrance, then sat gripping the steering wheel, tremors still running through my arms. A part of me screamed to drive straight to the nearest precinct, to spill the entire nightmarish sequence. But a larger, more pragmatic part, the part that pictured my wife, my kids sleeping safely at home, knew silence was the only option. Pulling away, heading towards the distant promise of home, I tried to scrub the night's events from my mind, making a silent, fervent vow. No more graveyard shifts, no more shadowed figures hailing me from dark corners. Daylight hours, familiar routes, ordinary faces, that would be my future. Yet, even as the resolution formed, I knew the memory of this night, the intense eyes of Kaylin, the derelict farmhouse swallowed by darkness, the cold weight of the unspoken threat would remain, a permanent stain on my thoughts, haunting the quiet moments for years to come. And forever after, with every new fare climbing into my cab, a sliver of that fear would return, whispering the question, just another ride or the start of something else? Phantoms were mere folklore to me, fodder for campfire tales I'd always dismissed with a cynical smirk. That certainty fractured the evening I took up residence in the uppermost chamber of a guest house whose timbers groaned with the weight of a century. Mrs. Albright, the proprietor, a woman seemingly carved from seasoned oak, met me at the threshold. She permitted my suitcase and I entry before uttering a word, her posture ramrod straight. The key she offered, diminutive and tagged with a faded label, felt strangely significant. "That particular room," she stated, her tone devoid of inflection, "tends to remain unoccupied. Guests find it unsettling." A dismissive gesture was my reply. I assured her, Silas, that my nerves were sound. A truth, or so I'd thought. 3 flights of protesting stairs spiraled upward, each tread breathing out the scent of aged timber and settled dust. The corridor above was a narrow channel, its patterned walls shedding skin in places. A solitary bulb overhead cast a jaundiced, intermittent glow. My assigned chamber lay sequestered at the corridor's terminus, adjacent to a small dormer window overlooking the cobbled street. Within, austerity reigned. A cot-like bed, a compact chest of drawers, a lone chair positioned near the window. A slanted ceiling above a cramped wardrobe betrayed our position directly beneath the eaves. The air hung thick, stagnant, pressing faintly against my eardrums, the familiar sensation of a vacuum sealed. I wrestled the window sash open, coaxing a hesitant breath of night air inside. For a time, the initial night offered only the house's natural nocturne, the sighing of floorboards, the distant gurgle of plumbing, sounds magnified by my own light slumber. I had settled into bed near midnight. Then, around the second hour past, a distinct rhythm intruded, the measured tread of heavy footwear upon the hallway planks. Not hurried steps, but a slow, deliberate pacing. Slipping from bed, I eased the door ajar. The corridor slumbered in shadow, save for that anemic bulb near the stairwell's maw. And there, at the far end, stood a silhouette, tall, cloaked in a coat of archaic cut, crowned with a broad-brimmed hat. I blinked, clearing the fog of sleep, yet the form remained. It pivoted its head, a slow turn toward my sliver of light. Though the dimness obscured any features, an unnerving certainty fixed upon me. It was observing me. As I widened the door, forming a question of assistance on my lips, the figure retreated a single step, melting into the deeper gloom. One moment, substance; the next, utter vacancy. A visceral tension seized my frame. The fine hairs on my arms prickled erect. My heart hammered against my ribs. Silence stretched, taut and absolute, for perhaps 10 heartbeats. I scanned the corridor again. Empty. Emerging fully, I traversed the length of the hallway to the spot where the presence had stood. Nothing. No adjacent doors stood open. No floorboards whispered under retreating weight. Only the thrumming of my own pulse, a frantic drumbeat in my ears. I commanded my lungs to draw slow, steady breaths, retreating to my room and securing the lock. Overtiredness, I insisted inwardly. Imagination. Yet sleep remained elusive, each settling creak of the old house a potential harbinger. The apparition did not return, and sheer exhaustion eventually claimed me near the cusp of dawn. Consciousness returned sluggishly, late in the morning. An immediate discrepancy registered. The simple chair beside the window occupied a position inconsistent with my memory. I distinctly recalled setting it flush against the wall before sleep, yet now it stood a good foot adrift. Perhaps I'd jostled it unknowingly in the darkness. A lapse in recollection? Plausible deniability warred with a nascent unease. Downstairs, Mrs. Albright moved with quiet efficiency in the kitchen, polishing countertops. My attempts at conversation were met with clipped, non-committal replies. She ventured no inquiry about my night's rest, offered no commentary on nocturnal disturbances. I chose silence, departing for the day and returning only as evening deepened. That second evening found me seeking refuge in a book, the room bathed in the faint amber radiance of the lone dresser lamp. Around midnight, a soft, grating noise materialized, disconcertingly close, perhaps just outside or nearer still. I held my breath, straining to listen. A soft thud followed. My pulse quickened. Setting the book aside, I crept to the door, pressing my ear to the wood. Silence reigned in the hall. I flung the door open abruptly. Emptiness greeted me. Turning back into the room, I stopped. The heavy chest of drawers stood askew, inches from its previous position. I knew its placement precisely. I'd aligned it with a flaw in the floorboards. Now it listed, undeniably shifted. I frowned, setting my shoulder against the solid timber. It resisted, yielding only grudgingly to my effort. The notion of its autonomous movement defied logic. Scrutinizing the floor revealed no scuffs, no telltale signs of dragging. An absence of explanation gnawed at me. I remained vigilant long into the night, eyes fixed on the dresser, the lamp burning defiantly. Near 2:30, a susurrus arose, low and indistinct, seemingly emanating from the space beside my bed. It sounded like hushed colloquy, the words themselves lost in the murmur. Leaping to my feet, I whirled around, finding only bare plaster in the vacant air where the sound had been. The whispering dissolved. My throat constricted. A tremor ran through my limbs. I tried to pinpoint the origin, but it felt diffuse, centered vaguely near the bed's foot. Then silence descended once more. Sleep, when it came, was shallow and fraught, haunted by the persistent sensation of unseen scrutiny. By the third dawn, exhaustion had laid siege. My eyes stung. My head pulsed with a dull ache. Descending for breakfast, I could manage only a few swallows of coffee. Mrs. Albright inquired, perhaps noticing my pallor, if all was well. A strained smile, an assurance of wellness. The lie felt thin, but admitting that her attic room was unraveling my composure seemed unthinkable. Seeking clarity in the morning air, I stepped outside. The guest house presented an aged facade to the street. Tall, narrow windows framed in weathered wood, a sharply pitched roof crowned by a whimsical weather vane. My gaze drifted upward to the small dormer window of my room. A peculiar dislocation occurred then, a fleeting sense of observing myself within that frame, or perhaps perceiving the scene from a different point in the building's long history. That night, I resolved to capture evidence. My phone, poised to record, became my anchor in the encroaching darkness. I lay in bed, lamp extinguished, device clutched tight. As midnight tolled within the house's ancient frame, the familiar creaking commenced in the corridor, the footfalls now bolder, more pronounced. They approached my door, hesitated, then receded down the hall. After a measured pause, I slipped out. The hall light stuttered erratically. There, near the stairwell's descent, stood the recurring shape. The dark coat, the obscuring hat, disturbingly solid. I raised my phone, finger hovering over the record icon. In that instant, the bulb above spasmed again, plunging the figure into darkness, then restoring light to an empty space. I sprinted toward the stairs, heart frantic. No one. A quick search of the landing below yielded nothing. No sound of hurried retreat, no closing doors. A profound chill permeated me, accompanied by the faint, incongruous scent of old leather. Ascending back to my floor, breath ragged, I reviewed the phone's capture. Only a shaky panorama of the dim corridor. A frustrated oath escaped me as I secured my door. I sank onto the bed, striving for composure. Suddenly, the dresser lamp winked out. I froze, every nerve alight. A heartbeat later, it flared back to life. A clammy sweat broke out on my palms. Leaping up, I examined the cord, securely plugged. The switch clicked reliably under my thumb, the bulb burning steady. Retreating slowly, my breathing rapid and shallow, the impulse to flee warred with a stubborn refusal to be driven out, to grant Mrs. Albright the satisfaction of a predicted retreat. I remained, though my insides churned and stillness felt impossible. In the pre-dawn hours, a fragile sleep finally took hold, only to be shattered by an appalling screech. Harsh, grating, like metal dragged across stone. Disoriented, I sat bolt upright, heart seizing. The sound echoed, seeming to rise from the bowels of the house, perhaps the cellar. Armed with my phone and a small torch, I ventured from my room into the slumbering building. It was nearing 4. Silence reigned. The basement door, previously always secured, now stood slightly ajar. The switch beside it emitted a low buzz, the connected bulb flickering fitfully. My torch beam cut through the opening, illuminating descending steps choked with the scent of damp earth, concrete dust, and decay. Reluctance warred with compulsion. Step by cautious step, I descended, muscles taut, knuckles white around the torch. The cellar lights above pulsed unreliably over a cavern crammed with discarded furniture and stacked cartons. I scanned the gloom, expecting intrusion. Nothing. Then a faint metallic chinking from behind a towering shelving unit. Drawn nearer, I found a small length of chain, suspended from a hook, swaying rhythmically, tapping against the metal upright. No draft stirred the stagnant air, no window offered entry to the wind. A flush of adrenaline warmed my face. My breath came in shallow gasps. I stood frozen, torch beam sweeping the shadows, the frantic rhythm of my own heart, the only clear sound. Suddenly, the overhead bulb flared brightly, then died, plunging the space into near-total darkness relieved only by my torch. A knot of fear tightened in my chest. I swept the beam across the shelves again, vacant. Turning to retreat, my light caught the handrail bordering the stairs. It was coated in thick dust, and upon that dust lay a multitude of handprints, large and small, clearly adult, overlapping as if a throng had passed, pressing their palms against the wood. Yet I had heard nothing beyond my own movements. I recoiled, playing the light over the eerie impressions. How? The question hammered silently. Reaching out tentatively, my fingertip met the dusty surface. Grime adhered, yet the prints remained distinct, undisturbed save for my own small mark. Swallowing against a dry throat, I snatched my hand back, wiping it absently on my trousers. Calling for Mrs. Albright seemed futile. I ascended the remaining stairs with unnerving quiet, slipped through the doorway, shut the heavy door, and twisted the key firmly in the lock. In the main hall, breathing heavily, I noted the light burned steady now, a small island of normalcy in the otherwise dark and silent house. The journey back to the attic felt longer, each shadow a potential concealment. My hands trembled. A sheen of cold perspiration slicked my brow and neck. Inside my room, lock secured, I slumped against the door, a high-pitched whine filling my ears. Pacing the confines, I wrestled with the urge to gather my belongings and flee. Yet something held me fast. Not mere curiosity, but a peculiar entanglement, a sense of being caught in the confluence of the house's present decay and echoes of its past. The creaking floors and failing lights belonged to now. The man in the antiquated coat, the inexplicably moved furniture. These felt like intrusions from another time entirely. Sleep offered no further respite. As daylight painted the street outside my window, I watched the mundane procession of morning commuters, their ordinary lives a stark contrast to the disquiet within these walls. Later, resolved to confront Mrs. Albright, I found her at the front desk, occupied with paperwork. Before I could articulate my experiences, she spoke, her gaze steady, her tone matter-of-fact. "I'm aware you've been disturbed." No surprise, no solicitation for details, just a statement delivered with weary resignation. Her eyes, pools of tired shadow, held mine. I waited, anticipating elaboration, but she remained silent. When I pressed, mentioning the figure, the seller's dusty testament, she offered only a slow shake of her head. "It's a venerable building," she murmured. "It develops certain dispositions toward newcomers." And with that cryptic pronouncement, the subject was closed. Returning to my chamber, I attempted to formulate a plan, but my thoughts scattered like startled birds. Nerves frayed, the boundary between perception and illusion blurred. Seated on the edge of the narrow bed, I replayed the sequence. The spectral pacing, the vanishing act, the animate furniture, the disembodied whispers, the seller's grim tableau, those impossible handprints. Logic warred with a primal dread, my heart accelerating with each remembered detail. The desire to escape wrestled with an inexplicable compulsion to understand. Distractions proved futile. A profound disquiet had taken root. So here I sit, Silas, confined to this attic space, suspended in anticipation. Below, Mrs. Albright attends to her duties. The corridor outside lies dormant. Yet my hands betray an internal tremor. My eyes dart nervously toward the wardrobe, and every flicker of the overhead bulb sends a jolt through my system. The very air feels crowded, thick with the residue of other times. I inhabit a place caught between moments, unsure if I am truly alone. How much longer I can endure this remains uncertain. For now, I listen, I wait, and I pray the next manifestation does not shatter the fragile remnants of my composure. Phantoms were folklore until they weren't. Now, every shadow seems to watch, and the space behind me is never truly empty. That antiquated rotary phone, I'd always regarded it as mere flotsam, a relic salvaged years prior from the sprawling chaos of a weekend flea market. Its shell, a tired shade of almond, bore a fine fissure near the coiled cord's exit point. The dial itself, a temperamental mechanism, would catch and stutter under impatient fingers. I'd granted it space on a diminutive end table in my living room, less for function than for its aesthetic, a tangible echo from a bygone frequency. It possessed no wall connection, no pulse of service, purely ornamental. Yet, roughly 4 weeks ago, the fabric of the ordinary began to fray. The phone summoned a ring from the depths of night. Initially, delusion seemed the likeliest culprit. Half submerged in sleep, I registered a smothered chime that knotted my insides. A glance at the glowing digits beside my bed, nearing 2 a.m. I levered myself upright, straining my ears against the silence. The sound had vanished. A dream, I assured myself, sinking back into the pillows. The following night, it recurred, this time closer to 3. The ring wasn't the crisp demand of a modern device. It resonated thickly, as though filtered through dense plaster or leagues of water. A prickle of cold traced patterns across my skin. Propelled by a hammering heart, I rose and navigated the darkened apartment to the living room. There it sat, inert upon its table. The handset rested snugly in its cradle. Its plastic form absorbed the meager streetlight filtering through the window, appearing lusterless and still. Lifting the receiver yielded only silence, then the barest whisper of static. Less a noise, more a low vibrational hum. I waited, my grip tightening on the cool plastic curve. No voice emerged. A parched sensation coated my tongue. Replacing the handset, I flicked on every lamp, flooding the apartment with stark, artificial daylight. Rationalizations flickered. Phantom wiring within the walls, perhaps? Stray signal interference? Yet, days later, the phenomenon solidified into unnerving precision. The phone would ring at precisely 2:47 a.m. nightly. My attempts to ignore it proved futile. The summons persisted, 4 or 5 rings before lapsing into silence. My nerves felt abraded, exposed. A new, unwelcome pattern emerged. I began waking minutes before the appointed time, compelled to pad into the living room beforehand. I'd stand there in the gloom, transfixed by that obsolete object, the frantic rhythm of my own blood loud in my ears. Then, the ring. A jolt every single time. My hand, when reaching for the receiver, trembled uncontrollably, and each time the same reward, static, sometimes punctuated by faint clicks or a desiccated rasp that hinted disturbingly at respiration. Impossible to be certain. After a week besieged by this ritual, I resolved to banish the object. I carried it down to the building's musty storage area, depositing it in a shadowed corner behind a barricade of forgotten boxes. Relief washed over me as I ascended the stairs. The subsequent night offered deeper, uninterrupted sleep. 2 nights later, however, the ringing returned. Heart seizing, I stumbled from bed, navigated to the living room, and froze. It was back, enthroned on its little table. More unsettling still, it was now connected to a wall socket I'd never consciously registered before. The cord snaked along the floor, its termination point seeming to melt into the obscurity behind the baseboard. Utterly baffling. I knew, with unshakable certainty, I had transported it downstairs. My hands shook violently. I bent, wrenched the plug from the wall, and hefted the phone. It felt unnaturally cold. This time, I thrust it deep into my closet, behind a bulwark of old coats, securing the door with its lock. That night, 2:47 a.m. arrived with its inevitable summons. Stepping into the living room felt like wading through thickening dread. The phone occupied its customary place on the table. The closet door remained securely locked, yet the instrument was free. I snatched the receiver from its cradle. Static erupted against my ear, a brief roar that subsided into tiny, intermittent crackles. Then, through the noise, my name, Elias, repeated in a low, grating whisper. Elias, Elias, Elias. The receiver slipped from my grasp, clattering against the floor. My legs turned to water. Scrabbling back to the bedroom, I slammed the door shut, the lock clicking into place. Sleep was an impossibility. Morning found me forcing myself to confront the living room. The phone sat there, impassive, the cord once again disconnected from the wall, lying limp beside it. Silent. A powerful urge to discard it warred with an equally potent, inexplicable reluctance. Fear was a constant thrum beneath my skin, yet I felt tethered to it. Not possessed precisely, but drawn by an invisible current. A perverse fixation, I reasoned, a desperate need for explanation in the face of the nonsensical. I began setting my alarm for 2:45 a.m., preferring vigilance to being startled awake. It solidified into a grim routine. Wake, wait by the phone, lift the receiver on the first ring. Each encounter yielded only the familiar tapestry of static, ethereal whispers, faint clicks. Sometimes I'd hold the line, straining for a coherent word, a phrase. Sometimes I'd venture questions into the void. Who is this? What is it you want? Never a direct reply. One night, the sound was undeniably breathing, slow, labored inhalations and exhalations. My own breath hitched, shallow and erratic. The pounding in my temples matched the frantic beat in my chest. "Hello?" I managed, my voice thin. "Can you hear me?" The response was a murmur, soft and indistinct, slipping away before I could grasp its shape. Focusing felt like trying to capture smoke. I hung up, staring at the phone, palms slick with sweat, mind a frantic whirl of unanswerable questions. Sleep became a fractured commodity. I found myself drifting off at my desk, jolted awake by imagined rings. My supervisor inquired about my well-being. I mumbled excuses about stubborn insomnia. Sharing the truth felt impossible. The narrative sounded ludicrous, the stuff of cheap thrillers. Friends might offer jokes about spectral interference or curses, but the reality held no humor for me. A perpetual unease settled over me, tinting even daylight hours with shadow. My apartment felt claustrophobic, charged. Every glance towards the phone was freighted with anticipation of the coming night. Irritability became my default state. I grew withdrawn, sharp-edged. Colleagues noticed the shift, but I deflected their concerns. Another week bled away in this pattern. I contacted a telecommunications provider, grasping at straws. Could a disconnected phone, I asked, conceivably ring due to stray signals, atmospheric anomalies? The technician on the line sounded politely baffled. He'd never encountered such a thing. Radio frequency interference was suggested, tentatively, but that wouldn't account for the whispers, the static that felt almost responsive. His final advice was blunt: dispose of the antique. I ended the call, frustration curdling into despair. I almost followed his counsel. Phone in hand, I moved towards the apartment door, then faltered. A constricting pressure tightened in my chest. Defeated, I returned the phone to its place. Why this inability to sever the connection? A persistent internal whisper insisted. Tonight's call must be answered. That evening, I sought normalcy, a futile gesture. A meager dinner, the flickering inanity of television, anything to avoid the clock's relentless march. I performed push-ups on the living room floor, trying to exhaust the nervous energy thrumming through me. Still, my gaze kept snagging on the phone. Restlessness coiled in my muscles. Around midnight, I retreated to bed, knowing sleep wouldn't come. I lay staring at the ceiling texture, awaiting the inevitable. 2:46 a.m. I rose, the familiar acceleration of my pulse beginning its nightly ascent. I positioned myself beside the phone. Punctually, it rang. 4 muffled summons. I lifted the receiver instantly. Static hissed, then subsided to a low drone. "I'm here," I stated, my voice steadier than I felt. "I can hear you." A faint whisper answered, coalescing again around my name. "Elias." Dampness beaded on my forehead. I forced the words out. "I'm listening. What do you want?" The static swelled, crackling louder, rising and falling in rhythmic waves, as if striving for articulation. For a full minute, I stood rigid, clutching the handset, every nerve fiber taut. At last, a single syllable pierced the noise, distorted, unintelligible. Then, abruptly, the line fell silent. The remainder of the night passed in wakeful vigil, my eyes fixed on the phone. The next day, I undertook a purge of potential interference, systematically unplugging every electronic device. Television, stereo system, lamps. The phone remained quiescent during daylight, but I needed to eliminate possibilities. I scoured the walls for hidden jacks, concealed wiring. Nothing. Night descended, the routine reasserted itself. At 2:47 a.m., the ring. I snatched the receiver, holding my breath. The static felt sharper this time, almost caustic against my ear. A low, indistinct mumbling filtered through. "I can't hear you," I pleaded, my voice trembling. "Speak clearer." For a fleeting microsecond, the static dissolved and my name returned, not whispered now, but chanted, slow and relentless. "Elias, Elias, Elias." A vice clamped around my chest. My hands began to shake uncontrollably. The urge to hurl the receiver across the room was nearly overwhelming. Instead, I slammed it back onto the cradle, panting, staring at the phone. My mind felt fractured, buzzing with terror and a sickening magnetic pull. I needed to understand. I migrated to the living room couch, surrendering my bedroom for proximity. A small notebook appeared on the coffee table, a hopeful repository for deciphered fragments. Most nights offered only the usual static and susurrations. Occasionally, a dry, rasping laugh or a hacking cough echoed down the line. Sometimes syllables surfaced, teasingly close to my name before dissolving back into noise. I scribbled random letters gleaned from the ether. R, N, S, meaningless constellations. My apartment devolved into neglect, littered with coffee cups, testament to perpetual vigilance and exhaustion. Food became functional fuel, quickly consumed between bouts of waiting. My existence began to orbit the nightly call. Social invitations went unanswered, texts ignored. Answers felt tantalizingly close, a final piece of forbidden knowledge just beyond my grasp. My reflection offered a stark portrait. Pallid skin, bruised crescents beneath my eyes, rumpled clothing. Every mundane sound became an assault. The refrigerator's hum, a floorboard's creak, each triggering a jolt of adrenaline. One night, I marshaled my resolve, attempting aggression. When the phone rang, I answered with forced anger. "Stop calling me. Leave me alone." My voice frayed at the edges, but the intent was clear. The static surged in response, escalating to a near-physical pressure, like an electronic growl. It crested, then sheared off into absolute silence. A brief, hollow victory surged through me. Had I finally repelled it? Seconds later, the phone rang again, louder, more insistent. I grabbed the receiver. "What do you want from me?" I hissed. Static detonated in my ear, making me flinch, and then the slow, inexorable chant of my name. "Elias, Elias, Elias." It sounded nearer this time, intimate, as if whispered directly into the canal of my ear. I slammed the handset down, my entire body radiating heat, trembling on the verge of some internal combustion. I couldn't bear it, and yet I couldn't disconnect. The following week unfolded with grim predictability. The phone rang nightly, its punctuality absolute. Time itself felt distorted, days blurring into a nervous countdown towards 2:47 a.m. I dreaded the night, yet simultaneously craved its arrival. I found myself pacing, sometimes lifting the receiver moments before the appointed time, hoping to preempt the call, to catch something off guard. Useless. The connection only initiated at that precise minute, and I always answered. My responses varied. Calm inquiry, frustrated shouts, desperate pleas. The result remained constant. Cryptic sounds, static, the unnerving repetition of my name. Each call left me depleted and terrified, yet the compulsion only strengthened. I craved a breakthrough, a coherent sentence, an explanation for the siege upon my sanity. I even attempted to capture proof, setting my smartphone's voice recorder beside the rotary phone during the call. Listening back the next day revealed only the faintest ambient static. No whispers, no name, not even the distinctive ring of the old phone registered. It was as if the event existed only within the closed circuit between me and the device. The isolation deepened. No evidence, no witnesses, alone with this nocturnal theater of the absurd. Then, a few nights passed, a shift occurred. The ring came. I answered. The static resolved into a low, resonant hum that seemed to pulse against my eardrum. A long, slow exhalation traveled the line. "I'm here," I whispered, voice unsteady despite my efforts. "I'm listening." The hum intensified, A soft, shuffling sound followed, like fabric brushing against a surface, someone adjusting their position. My scalp tightened. I waited, braced for a voice. Instead, a palpable chill descended upon the room. My breath hitched, misting slightly in the suddenly frigid air. I gripped the receiver, knuckles wide. Then, a faint, abrasive scraping noise transmitted through the line, like fingernails drawn across metal. My heart hammered against my ribs. I opened my mouth to speak, but no sound came. The line went dead. I stood there, gasping for air, the receiver still clutched in my hand. This precipitated one final, desperate attempt at disposal. I cocooned the phone in layers of thick plastic refuse bags, binding them tightly with round after round of duct tape until it resembled a grotesque parcel. I drove miles out of the city, navigating through desolate industrial parks until I found a suitably anonymous, overflowing dumpster behind a derelict warehouse. I heaved the bundle inside, the act feeling illicit, like disposing of hazardous material. The drive home was fraught, my hands slick on the steering wheel. That night, exhaustion claimed me early. I sank into sleep, praying for reprieve. At 2:47 a.m., the muffled ring shattered the peace. I shot upright in bed, chest constricting. Stumbling into the living room, my blood ran cold. It was there, on the table, utterly free of plastic and tape. Worse, the handset was off the cradle, lying beside the base as if recently used mid-conversation. The cord stretched tautly to the wall socket. A wave of visceral dread washed through me, my head pounding. Trembling, I lifted the receiver. Static screeched. "I can't take this anymore," I cried out, the words torn from my dry throat. My voice fractured. The static modulated into a sibilant hiss, and again, my name, repeated like a cursed mantra. Elias. Elias. I hung up, stood paralyzed for a moment, then fumbled for my cell phone. Who would I call? The police? A friend? The absurdity, the sheer impossibility of explaining, stopped me cold. I lowered the phone, my gaze locked on that damnable rotary instrument. Now, I exist in the interlude. Waiting. 2:47 a.m. is a fixed point in my future, approaching relentlessly, night after night. I feel poised on the precipice of some terrible revelation, yet simultaneously sense my own coherence fraying at the edges. My heart accelerates merely thinking about the next call. The apartment shrinks around me. The walls seem to lean inward. I try to avoid the living room after darkness falls, but the compulsion is absolute. As the hour nears, I find myself drawn there, creeping across the floor, pulse thudding a heavy rhythm against my eardrums, waiting for the ring. It always comes. I always answer. There seems to be no other path. I cannot articulate the force that compels me, nor the phenomenon itself. And with each passing night, the static seems to clarify, just slightly. The whispers gain definition, feel bolder. Sometimes, long after I've replaced the receiver, I imagine I still hear my name echoing faintly in the chambers of my own ear. I don't know the consequences of ignoring the call, nor the ultimate outcome of continuing this ritual, but the choice feels illusory. I lift the receiver every single time, feeling that knot of tension tighten inexorably in my chest. Something demands my audience, and a terrified, fractured part of me desperately needs to know why.